Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Louisa Ulrich-Verderber to the show. Louisa is an artist, engineer, inventor, and founder of Undula Tech, a company dedicated to making renewable energy more accessible to those who need it most by taking inspiration from nature. She is currently a senior engineering and management major at Clarkson University and has been a welding artist since the age of 12. Her dual passions for art and science have led her to the field of biomimicry and drive her to ask new questions and find answers in odd places. Louisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Louisa, where in the world are you?
Well, currently I'm in northern Vermont. I was born and raised here, but I'm currently a senior at Clarkson University, which is in upstate New York.
And I'm super excited because I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're the youngest person I've had on the podcast so far. So I'm really excited about that.
That's kind of an honor. Thank you, I guess.
Of course. So, Louisa, I like to open the show by asking my guest the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Can I share multiple things, or do I have to pick just one?
It's all yours. Take it away.
Okay. I think maybe the most interesting thing about me is I was born 4 months early. So instead of 9 months, I was born at 5 months. And that had whole sorts of long, crazy stories and health complications, but I turned out great. And that experience, which I of course can't remember, but has always given me a great sense of trying to give back to the world and put something great into the world. And I've put that into this project, I've put that into other projects, but I'm always trying to add something more meaningful to the world than there was before.
Well, you've touched my heart already, and I'm so glad that you shared that. And speaking of your current project, can you share a little bit about your current endeavor?
Yes. So my current project is called Undula Tech. It is a renewable energy company that I founded in 2016, based off of trying to find renewable sources of energy trying to find renewable sources of energy that are inspired by nature. So the current model we're working on right now is a towerless wind turbine that is inspired by cuttlefish.
And for those that might not be aware, can you share what a cuttlefish is?
Yes. So a cuttlefish is a cousin of a squid. So squids, they kind of that long body and tentacles and they swim around. Cuttlefish are a lot like them. They're a little smaller and they live in reefs. And they have this funny little fin that goes around their little tube-shaped body that helps them swim around.
And so how does that work?
So it's really hard to describe without a visual, but so imagine how a skirt flutters or a flag flows in the wind, that kind of undulating motion, that's attached to their body. And that's what actually allows them to move back and forth and through the water. And we've taken basic design, that undulating fin, and kind of applied that in reverse, where instead of using it for locomotion, we run a flow past it and it generates power.
So hundreds, if not thousands of people look at wind towers all day long. What inspired you to come up with a different idea for a wind tower?
So it actually started in high school. When I was in high school, I went through high school a little differently. I knew coming into high school, I'd gone to normal, elementary schools, middle schools, and I knew that I really, really wanted to pursue my passions. At the time, that was art and science, and it still is today. And I knew that I couldn't get the kind of exploratory, project-based learning that I really, really wanted by going through normal school. But I also didn't really want to be homeschooled because I knew that could be really isolating. And so I went to my principal as a little 14-year-old, and I had a diagram drawn out, and I had a little presentation, and I told him, hey, I want to do this experiential learning. And at the time, Vermont, the state I grew up in, was kind of changing how they looked at education and their education policy. And so the principal at my school was like, hey, this is really cool. Luckily, he was a very open-minded guy. And he said, let's try this out. You'll be a pilot student for this kind of programs. And so all through high school, I got to take regular classes. I took AP classes, and then I would have two or so hours in the day that were left for me to do projects of my own design. And for the first 2 years, I covered all the basic classes in the school. Like I took health class through this, and I took earth science through this, and I took a couple other courses through this that were like the required ones. And but then after about 2 years, I had all this time to do kind of whatever I wanted, to learn whatever I wanted. And at that time, my family was debating whether to get a solar panel or a wind turbine for our property. Because we live out in the kind of rural part of Vermont, and we wanted to kind of go more off grid. And something that really, really shocked me as I was like watching them go through this process was how astronomically expensive even really, really small scale renewable energy is. For example, like a 10 kilowatt wind turbine, which is one of the smaller ones you'd see on on a building site or near a house or near a farm. It would power, one or two buildings. Those cost upwards of $40,000, and that's before you install it. That's before you get insurance or permits. And so I just was looking at this huge paywall, and I was like, no one's ever going to become invested. No normal people are going to become really invested in renewable energy if it's so far out of everyone's price range. And at the time I was thinking about this, and I was also digging deep into biology, and I love animals. I've always loved animals. And I had just watched a documentary on cuttlefish the night before, and I was in AP bio class, and I was supposed to be taking notes on the Krebs cycle or whatever it was. I don't really remember because I wasn't paying attention. And I was just doodling, and I was thinking about this problem. And I doodled this kind of fin shape that is on the side of a cuttlefish. And I was like, well, what if that's what you generate power from? What if instead of on a turbine, you mount it on a building, directly on the sides of buildings or on the roofs of buildings, and that's what generates power? And so that little doodle over the past 5 years has grown into multiple prototypes and awards and different accelerator programs. And it's been an amazing ride. But yeah, that was the initial inspiration, was me thinking about, how can we make renewable energy actually accessible to people? And what can we take an inspiration from nature and kind of plug that into the problem?
It really is an inspiring and beautiful story. From the technical aspect, how does it work?
So, as I said before, kind of imagine an upright sheet. Currently, we're using cloth, and it's supported by arms by a ligature, and then that is connected to a central shaft that, as the arms undulate back and forth, as that sail undulates back and forth, it powers a generator. So instead of being blades in this circular cross section, it's actually, if you look at it from the front, it's like a triangle, like an upside down triangle. And that kind of undulating motion, kind of like a sail would on a sailboat, it kind of self-tacks, and it actually will start itself in a breeze, and it will start running.
And for those of you that are struggling to imagine it in your mind, I will put a link to your website in the show notes. Yes. So I really appreciate that explanation.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of visual and a lot of GIFs that make it really clear what's happening, because it is hard to imagine.
And, in full disclosure, Louisa and I had a conversation about 2 weeks ago, and I have to tell you, ever since we spoke, I've been looking around. I take a daily walk, and I've been looking around at all other aspects of nature, and just the way I try to watch the wind as it goes through the leaves of trees and different objects, and just try to imagine what you've built and other opportunities to capture that energy and then transfer it in a more, I'm going to say, aesthetic way than windmills.
Yes. Oh, that's so touching to me. I love hearing people's ideas. I love talking to people about this, because everyone I talk to has a different idea for how you could use this, or a different idea for how you could tweak the design, or a new application for it. And so to me, it's just so fulfilling to talk to people about it.
I really appreciate you sharing. So, our show is really focused on the why behind what you're doing, and you kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the show. But if you can elaborate a little more, there could be, so many other things you could be doing right now. You're out of high school, in college. Why is this project, why does this mean so much to you?
I think because at the time I thought of it, and even today, as I said before, my main goal with any project I do is to bring, something meaningful into the world. I think I get that inspiration from my art. I was an artist for all through high school and still am now. And that process of creating something tangible and meaningful that brings people joy is just electric and addicting. And for me, with this project, I really, really do see it as an opportunity to make small scale renewables really accessible to people. One of my main challenges and main design constraints for this is that I want to make it as cost effective as possible to build and to make and to set up. Because I can really see this being easily deployed and built on site in places that don't have access to a centralized grid system. So whether it's places that have more decentralized grid systems, like a lot of countries in Africa, or remote places in the United States for people who are living off grid or out in the Midwest, I can see it as having a lot of varied applications. And for me, that varied application and getting renewable energy more accessible to people that need it most is my main driver for this. And also from the research end of things, I haven't seen anyone doing critical work with this type of design. There are a few people out there that are playing with this type of design, but more from a locomotive standpoint, making kind of like underwater drones, but nothing from the standpoint of how do we make this actually usable to people all over the world.
So one of my jobs as an interviewer is to push a little harder. So why is it important to you that people have accessibility to inexpensive renewable power?
I think that's a good question. I think having access to reliable electricity in this day and age is bordering on a right. And there are so many people in the world. I think the other day I was looking up statistics, but there are still roughly 1 million people on the planet that don't have access to electricity. That's 1 million people that could be running businesses, that could be supporting their families. That's 1 million children that could be going to school. That's 1 million children that could be studying outside of school. And so from my view, making sure that renewable energy is accessible to so many people is almost a humanitarian issue, in that it would level the playing field and give so many people a leg up. And from the renewable standpoint, there's the point of, having green energy is just better for the planet. It's better for the longevity of humanity and the planet itself and our coexistence. And so I wanted to create something that was easy to make and easy to build and easy to implement that would help people and make the world a better place, not only for the people using it, but just in sense of sustainability. I don't know if that's as deep of an answer as you want. I can go deeper.
No, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, one of the questions I like to ask my guest is advice to the audience, but I'm going to change it up a little bit for you.
Okay.
It seems like your parents were very encouraging of your projects. Can you share how that played into, your confidence in doing what you've done?
Yeah. So we talked about this in our conversation a couple of weeks ago, but and I'll reiterate. So when I was growing up, my parents worked for the Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Fish and Wildlife here, and their main job while working with them was rehabbing wildlife. So what that meant was if a deer got hit beside the road but had a baby deer that was fine, we would take in that baby animal and take care of it. We would do this with all sorts of animals. We did this with moose, deer. I think we had a skunk at one point. It was maybe an ill-advised decision. Foxes, a porcupine, and so I just grew up in this like almost storybook world of having a backyard full of animals. And from that young age, my parents, as you can probably guess, from raising all these animals, were huge natural history nerds. And so from that young age, they would always encourage me to learn and be curious. I was always flipping over logs to find bugs and asking what the bug was or why it was under the log. And they were just incredibly encouraging to me to keep asking questions and to keep learning things. And that kind of motivation has followed me through almost everything I've done. asking, why does this do this? Or can we combine this and that? Or, is there a better solution to this problem? And, their encouragement has meant the world to me. And I don't think I would have come to the conclusions I've come to create this idea and to create this project if they hadn't been behind me the whole time saying, yeah, you can do it. Or, okay, so that experiment failed, but that's what science is. You got to keep going. And so they still mean the world to me, and their encouragement has meant the world to me through this whole process.
It sounded like your principal too was very open to your ideas.
Yes. That I have been extraordinarily lucky to meet a string of people that are willing to kind of humor me and my strange ideas.
So then I'm going to ask the advice question. If you could speak to a forum of parents, what advice would you give them? If you could speak to a forum of educators, what advice would you give them? So 2 separate questions.
For parents, I think I don't have kids, so I feel like I don't really have authority to say this, but I would say that if your kid has a passion, if they show a real interest in something, whatever that is, whether it's like my nephew who loves dinosaurs, or me who really loved anything, honestly, whatever that is, do your best to encourage them at every moment. Whether that's, saying, hey, okay, all right, they've got a question with this bug. All right, I'm going to go find the bug book because we were the family that had the bug book. Or, I don't know the answer to that. Let's look it up, and then sit next to them and look it up. Because having those parental figures be truly interested in what you're interested in is a self-fulfilling cycle. Where if you have those people behind you that are saying, you can do it, you have to keep going, you just keep learning, then you will want to keep learning. And it's tough if they ask weird questions, because all kids ask weird questions. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay, because then you can learn it together, and that creates an even more meaningful experience. I think for me, some of my most cherished memories with my parents are when, there was one day where me and my dad took apart an owl pellet together, and neither of us knew what was going to be inside it. I think he might have pretended not to know. I was 5, but and that kind of collaboration, co-learning together, I think is really, really valuable. It really it has stuck in my mind, at least, and has kept me going whenever I've felt stuck or been really disappointed by the outcome of an experiment, because I know that if I talk to them about it, then they can say, okay, well, that sucks, but what can we do next? We know that you're this smart person. We know that you have these interests. We're not going to let those go. And I think for educators, kind of the same thing. I think I've been really lucky to have found educators and mentors in my life that fill that same very encouraging role, where, I showed an interest in something, and they're like, okay, I'm going to make sure that you perform at what I know you can perform at, and make you ask questions you might not want to ask, or give you answers to things you might want to not know, but it's the right answer. And we're going to find a way to get that knowledge to you. And, like with my principal, it also takes some open-mindedness. My principal was really open-minded when I came in as a 14-year-old kid and asked him, hey, can I do this? And, I think educators and with parents, it takes, flexibility and encouragement, and, maybe almost the same passion as your kid has or that student has. Not necessarily for that same subject, but for them to be interested in that subject.
I really appreciate you sharing both. Going back to your current endeavor, where are you from a stage perspective, and is there anything that my audience can do to help you?
Yeah, so right now, times are strange right now, this past month, but over the past few months, I've been working with an organization called the Biomimicry Institute. Biomimicry is the general term for taking inspiration from nature and applying it to design and engineering problems. And they're an organization that's kind of like the forefront organization for biomimicry education and programs and conferences and all these kinds of things. And last spring, I entered into their Biomimicry Launchpad, which is a business accelerator program specifically for biomimicry startups. And I won a spot along with 12 other teams. And all through the fall, it was kind of like a course structure. I took it basically as a course through my junior or senior year. And the culmination of that was a trip to Panama, where all the teams went to Panama, and we had this wonderful week where we learned about each other's projects and pitched to potential investors and at a conference. And it was this wonderful, wonderful experience. And that opportunity so far has been wonderful. I learned so many things about business, about biomimicry, and just learning so many things from the other teams that I got to meet. Meeting those people was an invaluable experience. And where I'm at right now is kind of rolling off the wave of that high. I've gotten other opportunities. One of those is being on this podcast, which I'm so grateful for. I'm so happy for this opportunity. Another is currently the actual physical prototype of the Undula generator is in the Museum of Design in Atlanta as part of their biomimicry exhibit. But that will be coming back hopefully in May, and near the end of May, and I can start testing. I've had some slight redesign tweaks over the past few months as part of the biomimicry program. They really asked participants to dig into, like you asked, why are you doing this? Is this the right source of inspiration? Are there other sources and other creatures in nature that are maybe better suited to the problem you're trying to solve? And I took that question and I went back through the scientific literature, and I found several papers. I found a professor, I believe his name is Alexander Smits from Princeton. I might have that wrong. But he works and has worked for the past 20 or so years looking at the hydrodynamics of manta rays. And I was reading these papers, I had this kind of aha moment where I don't know if many people know this. I forget that I'm such a huge nature nerd sometimes. But manta rays are migratory. So they almost never stop swimming. They swim all across the world. And if you can picture manta ray in your head, like, the big trapezoid-shaped creatures, well, actually more like a diamond. And they just swim their whole lives. They have these big sweeping fins on either side of them. And I was looking at these papers, I was looking at pictures of manta rays, and I was wondering, is that a better inspiration for this design? They're migratory swimmers. It's a more efficient design for them to move long distances. And if you're trying to generate power from an efficient, constant source, it would be better to use a more efficient shape. And so in January, I redesigned the current prototype to mimic more closely manta rays versus cuttlefish. So the sail is a lot bigger. It's much more triangular shaped. The wavelength of that undulation is lower. And so once the prototype gets back from the museum over the summer, I'm going to be doing tests on that to see if that design has any significant differences to the past design. And if that works out, then I'll be moving more in the direction and doing more optimization. But right now, as far as prototyping goes, I'm kind of at that testing different things out and trying to optimize.
So, Louisa, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything that we have not explored that you'd like to talk about or share before we go?
I think that if there's a message I want to leave people, is that if you have a passion, if you have some idea that's just infectious, find some time in your day to go after it. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. It can be, hey, you're really passionate about knitting. Okay, knit a little bit, or paint a little bit, or tinker a little bit in your garage. I think that I don't think there's anyone in the world that wouldn't benefit from exploring their passions a little bit more.
I really appreciate the fact that you followed your passion, and thank you again for being a guest on our show.
Yeah, thank you so much.